Hello, and welcome to the Unassuming Podcast. On this episode, we're going to be examining our beliefs around work. More specifically, do people need to work? I'm your host, Karen Phelan, and with me, I have two guests, Jeannie Coyle and John Schuster. Jeannie has always known how to spot when conventional solutions won't work and build something better. She made her mark early as an American Express Senior Vice President of HR, partnering directly with CEO Lou Gerstner to design a landmark leadership pipeline system. After a job as head of leadership development at Bank of America, she jumped the corporate fence to build her own strategy and organizational development consulting business, pivoting mid-career to executive coaching. In what she calls her legacy lap, Jeannie has now channeled decades of business experience, creative reinvention, and hard-won wisdom to help mid to late career women redesign their best fit work lives. John Schuster is the director of the Coaching from the Mystic Core program at Mentor Institute. He's a seasoned coach, author, and trainer for many years. His coaching aspirations have evolved over these years. His lifelong effort to grow spiritually had been a private concern, but now finds public expression with his clients in Mentor's CMC program. Clients' highest aspirations are often obscured by their busyness and limiting beliefs. Reigniting this soulful potency with the blend of common sense and artistically, psychologically, and spiritually informed coaching processes is now John's capstone work. So welcome to both of you. And
Thanks, Ken.
I'd like to start off examining, do people need to work? Is this just a cultural thing, or is there some sort of inherent part of being human, of human nature, that says that we need to either add value or keep busy? So what do you think, John?
Well, I'll be glad to go first on that. And I would say, I would say it's inherent. I'd say we have the need to create and express who we are. And in some parts of the world, of course, where you're raised, it's a lot of work just to survive. And so if you were to say to the Eskimos, don't work, you don't have to work. So a lot of it is built around survival, evolutionarily speaking. But maybe if you were born in the Hawaiian Islands and just could pick fruit off of trees or something, you'd say, well, I don't have to work very much here. And so it could be, there's certainly cultural elements, but I also think there's something much deeper than that underneath all of us that needs to express who we are and try to make something happen in the world through our good efforts. So everything from making a living, having a job, putting food on the table, to absolutely, finding your calling, your vocation, and using your gifts in special ways in the world. That's how I think of work, Karen.
Okay. It's interesting and not surprising. I'm landing where John is, but my route is a little bit different. I always find a need to research because I can imagine things and feel a need to kind of ground them in what happened. So I was trying to unwind this cultural versus innate need. And so I went back and reminded myself of history. Of course, in the agrarian world, you had to hunt. You had to gather, you had to fight to survive. So there wasn't any question of anything interior, anything psychological. And then interesting, and I hadn't thought about this in classic Greek and Rome, which was a society that was more involved. Slaves did all the work. And so the people who didn't have to work thought that it was inferior to work. So they wanted time to talk about philosophy and art. And so I thought, I forgot about that. But in medieval time, religion stepped in and there was a religious aspect to it because it was God wants you to work. It's a way to salvation. And then going up to like the late 19th century and 20th century, of course, if you think about it, there were still kings and queens and there were a lot of people that had to work. I mean, they didn't have any other way to survive. And although I didn't watch all of Downton Abbey, I don't know if you guys did, but there's a character played by Maggie Smith, and she's a dowager. And so at one point she said, "What's a weekend? What's a weekend?" First, I didn't get that. And I thought, what for rich? You don't have weekends because you never have to work. So then it started getting into the psychologists and the sociologists thinking about work. And I'll stop there because I'm gonna ask John, what did you learn from Carl Jung about the importance of work?
Well, with Jung, he had a view of humanity that I truly appreciated, and he would say that at our core we are well. And I'm going to throw in a Jesuit priest that I liked a lot. He said we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Mm.
That was Teilhard de Chardin. I think Jung would largely agree with that in that we are somehow consciousness at our core, and then consciousness with the body attached. And so the body, of course, needs food and needs to sustain itself. But it's more of a consciousness trip than it is a physical trip. And what's fascinating about being a modern Jeannie, is that, to your point, what's a weekend? So many people work virtually now, and so many people work around the clock or work at different time. They work when they want to work. It's so much more choice than it used to be. Jung would be all over that, saying that's a good thing because it's about not fitting into a society that will force you to adapt to kind of the pressures of a corporate life that tell you think this way, do this, and instead he would be all about it's your freedom to choose who you are and how you want to be in the world. And of course, that's a great question for our society because so many people are so alienated from their work environments that haven't kept up with human needs. So I watch younger people trying to negotiate that sense of how do I find meaningful work, and that's Jung would be all over that meaningful work question.
Well, just kind of picking up the historical line. So the psychologists and the sociologists started coming in with the research and the theory around the importance of humanity and meaning, which I always bought into, but kind of look at what happened with the Industrial Revolution, both from the management level of what they were creating culturally and what people were dealing with. And Henry Ford, I mean, he did some really smart things like pricing a car so his workers could afford it. I mean, that's really, really great. And so he understood the production system. And so he had this plant called the River Rouge. They brought raw materials in one side and cars came out the other. And it was a miracle. But he famously said, well, I thought I was hiring hands and people came instead. So he didn't get that part of the equation. So I'm always thinking about culture in terms of our managers who create the environment for culture operating, and then what happens with people and what chance do they have as we kind of go forward today to have the freedom to create a work. I like doing work and life. I know we went through this whole thing. You balance work and life. And to me, I'm always not an either and. It's always been work and life. It's always been work and life. So between those two things, how do you find meaning, spirituality, and impact that is important in the world? Kind of coming up to today, both of you, I mean, what do you see as corporations doing that's helping create the space for freedom and other things that are important, meaning, act?
I wrote my book and it's over a decade old now, and I thought that the workplace was getting better. My book's called I'm Sorry I Broke Your Company, and it's about all the management consulting techniques that I realized don't work and actually create a
I
worse
love that book.
environment, a worse environment. And I thought it was getting better. I think it's gotten worse. I think the workplace, from what I've seen, has gotten worse. And I think a big part of the problem is we assume that people are rational and people aren't rational, and we've gotten very metrics and task focused. And that's not really how people operate. Whenever I join a board of something, the first thing I do is I get rid of Robert's rules and and I start opening up, we open up every meeting with some sort of conversation. And then people are like, "Oh, the whole nature of it changed." I'm like, "Yeah, cuz meaningful work, I think, is about relationships." I did read David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs. And my own corporate experience is there's an awful lot of meaningless, busy work. When I look back at my own career too, I became a management consultant because I thought I would be adding value, making work lives better. Let's be more efficient, let's be more strategic. And when I see all of the projects that I've done in hindsight, none of them added any value ultimately, really, or extremely few. Extremely, because they reorganized and all the work processes went away, or they were sold, or they merged, or blah, blah, blah. And I said, so I've spent, decades of a corporate career helping people find value in their work and being more efficient and being more strategic, and none of it added up to anything. So for me, what prompted this question is I've always been like a type A personality. I thought I was going to work till the day I died. And I closed my business during the pandemic and I did nothing. And I was never so happy in my entire life. I mean, I went for walks. I sat, maybe I meditated. I did the New York Times puzzles. And so I'm like, wow, I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. And I'm not working. I'm not adding value. And yet my life feels so much more meaningful.
Very interesting.
I'm coaching right now a 54-year-old who's retiring after a long accounting career in one of the big accounting firms. And, she's done being a partner for 20 years was enough. 54 years old, retiring to go live the way Karen did. But here's something on the positive side. You can always ask people, have you had good bosses? And they'll say, yes. It's that relationship thing again, Karen. And so inside these places, there's these big-hearted, big talented people who know how to deliver results, and they do it through people in beautiful ways. And I've always been inspired by
Right.
them. So and that's why one-on-one work for me became probably more interesting than consulting projects, Karen, because the bigger the system got, the harder it was to see the results of your work. One-on-one communication and conversations. Whew. You had somebody's life that you were getting to know, and what an honor it is and was. And I have some physician executives I'm working with now, and it's just such an honor to work with them. So it's all over the place, and that's why it's such a confusing topic. Can I give you a little poem here? I just thought of this poem by Khalil Gibran. So let's look at what a poet would say about this. Gibran said, why do we work? He asked the question, why do we work? And it's, we work to keep pace with the earth and with the soul of the earth. All knowledge is empty except when there is work. All work is empty except when there is love. Work is love made visible. And if you cannot work with joy, it is better to sit at the gate of the temple and take the alms of those who do work with joy, because to bake bread with indifference is to bake a bitter loaf, which feeds but half man's hunger. To bake bread with indifference is to make a bitter loaf, which feeds but half man's hunger. So that's about joy, expressing joy through your work. And I think that's why I'm 77 and still working part-time, because I'm finding it joyously filled with opportunities to touch people's hearts and to be touched by them. Enough said. I rattled on there.
It's kind of, I have a parallel while I got out of consulting. Interestingly enough, I had a few consulting assignments, and not the majority, with leaders who understood the type of perspective that John is talking about and could sit with the idea that beyond the structures in the process, culture is all about a relationship, setting an environment where people can have good relationships to get work done. But there's something else I want to bring into the conversation. With a lot of the psychologists like Jung and others, they started talking about personality and the importance of matching your personality to your right work. And that always fascinated me. And I've always had great admiration for people in the trades because I'm horrible at it. Give me a hammer and a nail, and it takes me 3 times to even find the nail and hit it. So I've always had great admiration for that. But it seems our society, and particularly for wealthy kids who are going to college, this idea of getting back to your core personality, what you're really good at and what would really make you sing, just gets parked to the side. It gets parked to the side, and through expectations, wherever they come from. No, I have to go to Harvard. I have to go to an MBA. I have to go to consulting, and I have to do all these other things. So I'm on the fast track to the right work to get rich. And so the women that I'm working with aren't necessarily on that track, but they are kind of stuck because there's so much. Know your purpose, know your personality. That's easy to say, but that's lifelong work, you know. I agree with John. I'm still figuring it out. But then, if in the best of times, them matching their work and what they do in their life to have satisfaction and impact is very, very difficult. Am I just working with people who are really finding it hard? Or is this an epidemic in our country and our culture and our organizations that people can't fight their way through to making their own decisions? Took the pandemic for you, Karen. Is it going to take AI? So, what's going on here? Why are people having so much problem? Why do they need so many coaches like John and me to figure this out? What's in the way? What's in the way?
Well, there's an assumption there, Jeannie, that there is like the perfect work for every person.
Hmm.
And I challenge that. I don't know if that's true. Is there a job um for every personality that fits your heart, I guess? And I'm not very sure there is, because I look at some of the very essential things that our society needs, and I thought the pandemic was really interesting, and we learned so little from that. Like, who are the essential workers? It's the people supplying the food in the grocery stores. And we learned that, the person stocking the food and the cashiers, we absolutely need these people. But if I were to ask a cashier at my local grocery store saying, you know, is this your life's passion? Or if I were to talk to a janitor, I mean, you absolutely need people to clean. And it's funny because these are jobs like they're probably protected from AI, because I don't know if they would come up with robots that clean, toilets yet. And if you look at that, like, this is an absolutely essential job. The people who pick up my garbage are absolutely essential. But if I were to ask them, like, is this your life's passion? I mean, what would they say to that? I mean, is this the expression of who I am?
Yeah. They would think you were hippy dippy. Well,
You know?
yeah,
So I really question that assumption, because there are jobs that are absolutely essential, and then there are jobs that I think people do for joy, and
yeah.
I don't think they necessarily overlap.
Well, thanks for questioning that assumption because I think part of the problem is the language.
There's a lot of
Hmm.
mystery in all this, Karen. I absolutely agree with you on that. But I would say I call it the transformative power of human consciousness. And I have been served by waiters and waitresses who seem to have a calling, at least that's stage of their life, to so get into the service aspect and the joy aspect of meeting customers that I think they are taking this menial job and they are making it meaningful with their heart. They're transforming a menial job into something that is human and actually beautiful. Mother Teresa said, it's not what you do, it's how much love you put into what you do. For God, it's all infinite. You can do it as small, but if you do it with love, God will make it infinite. And I absolutely believe I've seen that again and again with people who have what I would call tough jobs, where repetition or just things that wouldn't be good for me to do, but they somehow rise to the occasion and make that job more than a job. They somehow make it an expression of human interaction or human something. And I remember a guy told me years ago, I was doing a seminar in Cleveland, and he worked for his grandfather. And there was a construction company. In the summertime, he would dig ditches while to lay pipe and stuff like that. And in the name of the company, his name was something like Romanelli. Grandfather would see the grandson kind of sloughing off on digging the ditch, and he'd say, "Hey, grandson," whatever his name was, he'd say, "That's no ordinary ditch. That's a Romanelli ditch. So do it with heart, do it with passion, or don't do it." And I love that little story about that's a Romanelli ditch. So I think it's more complex than we know. And people have a way to enter the work world with all kinds of attitudes, and we all get knocked around, and then we try to find our way. Blessings to us all, because it's a tricky world.
A lot of the people that I work with are really into podcasts and reading articles that use the language of passion and what is your purpose? So that's a language I use a lot with them. With other people, they don't use that language. So it's more down to earth. What are you doing? What's the result of your doing? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? And I find, like John does, that a lot of people, fit in their job and actually are reasonably happy and like what they're doing. Others, it's just a job to pay the bills, and they go outside work to find out what they really want to do. I have a woman, an Asian woman from Hong Kong, who was a really incredible world-class designer. And she worked for a firm, and her firm provide interior design for a grocery store. You can imagine this was not tapping her essential talent. So we talked it through, and she was finding that awkward. She was putting beautiful 3-foot tiles in the Japanese Chinese part of Portland. And then she developed a beautiful commemorative Chinese garden in Astoria to honor the Japanese workers in the fishing industry. So she had all that outlet that fed her soul and just, kept her going. And eventually she and her husband, who also worked at the firm closed, and then they started their own design firm working with nonprofits. It's not that you fix it in the particular moment. It's not that, you say, oh, I'm not following my passion. It's very complicated. Your life is a mosaic, and you build it over time, but you do need to pay attention to, and I told you, John wrote a book, Follow Your Calling. Is your work calling you, and in what way? If not, is your call outside work? If it's not outside work, do you really change what you need to be doing? And then life, you have to say, is life going to allow me to do this? Do I still need to stay with this work at least for a while because I have to pay the bills? And so it's not simple, and there's always trade-off, and there's always choices. It's more like, kind of a puzzle than it is a linear, rational decision making.
So, Jeannie, you said several times about paying the bills, that people are working to pay the bills, but they find the expression of their joy in something else that they do. So I want to talk about, AI and also universal basic income, because we're hearing about AI is going to take away a lot of jobs, and it's already starting to take away entry-level jobs. It seems that software engineers are going to be the next, because these bots are getting very, very good at programming. And at the same time, we've had some small-scale experiments with universal basic income, which have generally been positive, that people did well, they spent the money well to improve themselves. Some people still continue to work, but it hasn't really been done on the large scale. So I guess my question is, can you imagine a world? Do you think we're going to be in a world where a lot of people won't have to work? Because to me, culturally, the Protestant work ethic is so ingrained in our culture. I used to say there should be a drinking game every time Joe Biden said hardworking Americans. And I'd always think, what about the ones who don't work so hard? Can we have a world where a lot of people aren't working and just get an income from the government?
I read a lot, and it seems like there's this huge variance in how many jobs are going to go away. More central feeling on which jobs are going away or what parts of jobs are going away. But some parts of jobs are going away, quite a few of them. And so I've done a little bit of listening about universal basic income, trying to project ahead. I think, because remember, I'm talking about work plus life. Well, people still do work. And I've learned that with universal basic income, what happens is, so far, not many people leave their jobs. They reduce their work hours, and then they take that time and they use it in different ways. They might be doing caregiving. They might be doing volunteer work. They may be taking an art class. So is that work? Well, no. I mean, that's an enriched life. So I think best hope, if some of the pressure can be taken off to help deal with the basic security issues with people having more opportunity for choice on how they spend their time. And you have to look at the whole schmear here to understand if they're having a successful life, with meaning that there's a lot of possibilities. Is this going to happen without intervention? Is it, to your point, we have a Puritan ethic here. You got to work. I mean, you got to do the hard work you don't even like in our society. You have to just, shoulder up and do it. That is very, very deep in a lot of people. And so what is it going to take for them to view that they can do some other stuff too? Andrew Yang, I don't know if either of you paid much attention to him. He was running for president a while ago. He called his universal business Freedom Impact, the freedom dividend. He rebranded it because he wanted to be about freedom, more freedom to do what you would really like. So I think he was on the right track, but I'm not sure if he or we or I or anybody understand the constraints or barriers to that working at large. So I'm optimistic and nervous at the same time.
I heard yesterday the phrase "apoca optimist." It's partially
Is that me?
partially scared, apoca, and then optimist. So apoca optimist. Yeah. And it was talking about AI, by the way. So positive and negative. I would say if we spiritually evolve if we expand our consciousness, and say, I'm not going to watch Seinfeld reruns or NFL reruns from 25 years ago. I'm going to do something good with this time that's good for me and that's good for society. Then I'm all for less work. I don't think I'm for less work for everybody. If all we do is create more distractions that waste people's time, and we are a culture of distraction, and that's distraction is basically anxiety management techniques for people. They have this mild angst about their lives and the lack of meaning in their lives, and so let's go have a secondary interest in something that, like, let's get on social media until we turn. So we'll see. I don't think AI is going to automatically give everybody a lot of free time. I may be wrong about that. I've been wrong about so many things in my life that I'll be happy to be wrong again.
I'm concerned a bit about concerned a lot about the kinds of jobs that AI is taking away are the aspirational jobs. We've always thought that automation, and I see those old things from the 1950s and 60s, and you see the kind of the Jetsons, and the wife has the robot that cleans the house and does the cooking and all that. But what's happening now is it's taking away the thoughtful work and even the creative work. And what's being left is the stuff that we haven't quite figured out how to automate, which is, like I said before, cleaning the toilets. So I'm just trying to figure out, if we have a universal basic income, will people still clean toilets? I mean, would that become a really high paying job? Because if you look now, at and this was something that I think David Graeber noted, but I always noted this too, is the most important people in my town are probably paid the least. Like our EMTs, right? These
Our
are the most
teachers.
important people.
Our
They
teachers,
are our
right.
teachers, our EMTs, our EMTs are all volunteers. Our teachers are paid little. It's the caregiving people are not paid very well. And I look at, like, okay, well, who are the people who are paid very well? And it's, pencil pushers.
Yeah. When I read about what's going to happen and what young people should do, and I have a friend who's specializing in college grads and trying to help them to figure out what to do, because all the entry level finance and white collar jobs are going away. And so the advice is not be a teacher, but it's healthcare, it's the trades, it's nonprofits. I didn't say teaching, which breaks my heart because I think teachers are just so important. So they talk about, this is the way people talk about it, but I don't think it's going to come true. You have jobs where the top level requires thinking and creativity. And then you have the bottom level job, which is rote. And so AI is going to take away all the rote stuff. So what will be left is the creative higher thinking parts of the job. Now, if that's true, and I don't think companies have figured that out yet, I think they're too much just getting rid of people. Then what do you need to do to help develop the workers can rise to that level? There'll still be fewer. There'll still be fewer, but maybe there won't be as many people getting out of work. So John talks about consciousness, consciousness, intelligence. You think one could be real optimist and say, well, there's going to be more of that type of work. And then more people who always wanted to be carpenters. I live in Prineville, which is the cowboy part of Oregon. Things like boating and hunting and all these things are very important to people. So, are people going to spend more time doing that? Aren't that many jobs in these areas? But Karen, you always reminded me because you have the technical background to understand AI. It's a lot more complicated than people think. There are so many variables. So placing a bet right now is hard and very fraught with air, right?
You know, it is. One of the things that people don't talk about with AI is that nobody knows exactly how it works. It's a little bit like consciousness. They just know that they designed these neural networks and they train them and they have their algorithms and then voila. And nobody really understands the why or the how. They just know that it does work. And that's always a little frightening when people don't understand exactly how something works. So my looking at it is I really do think it's different because when you've had automation, and it's like, oh, well, you have to have the people who write the software and the people to maintain the software and people to maintain the hardware. But when it comes to AI, you can just ask it like, okay, you need to maintain yourself. And it'll be like, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
You can give it the parameters. And sometimes, like I laugh when people say, oh, you need prompt engineering, AI prompt engineering, this whole new burgeoning field. I'm like, you have to be a real idiot to think that you need to specialize in prompt engineering.
It's gone. It's gone. I liked it. I like doing prompts.
I mean, you you just ask it, and if you don't get the results you want, ask again, and you ask it, what's the best way to get this result, and yeah. So I don't think there's anything like it from what I've seen. I mean, the advances it's made and what it can do, I see it can displace a lot of people.
You guys are both writers, and I know I was stunned when I started having them edit, when I started having AI edit for me and realizing they got to these other options so fast. I thought it improved my writing so quickly. I said, "Oof, no wonder writers are worried."
I think it's going to add a lot of capability, and I think each of us personally will figure that out. Will companies figure it out and how to have it impact jobs in a way that is net good? And for people who are leaving, will we have the universal income and then somehow give people more freedom to choose not just work, but what else they do? What can we do to make some of those things happen? So, we do need to somehow, and I don't know who we is and how we do it, but, change expectations of what's good work and what's a good life. I'm an English major and I've been reading a book on poetry and it's just, moving my soul because poetry moves my soul. So John pointed out, do you watch Seinfeld episodes or, worldwide wrestling, or do you read poetry? Well, you can't force people to read poetry, but what can you force them? What can you lead them to that is more enlightening? I think this was part of what Yang had and I don't know if he tried this as an experiment or someone else did, but they gave people universal income in a small community and they put together a barter system. So Karen, you were a great musician. So you would barter with me to play at my parties. And I was a good baker. So I'd pay for your music with my baking. Love that. I love that. I don't think it's scalable, but it's just very, very clever. Very clever. So I have a question for you, John.
Yeah, same
John
here.
and I have had ongoing conversations, and I went to 2 of his workshops on aging, which talks a lot about spirituality, bringing meaning to life. And our little church here is really changing because people are aging out. And David, my husband, told me there's something like, I don't know, 15, 20,000 churches that were eliminated last year. Juan, what's your current thinking about the potential for spirituality to enter the scene somehow for more people?
I think it's in the air now. I think it's a part of our zeitgeist that wasn't when we were younger. I did a workshop probably 40 years ago, and I had told some story about a great leadership act that had been done inside a company, not by a big, well-known CEO, but by a manager, but it had some moral beauty in it. He'd chosen the right path. He had been ethical, and he had been developmental. He had helped people grow during that process. And so I told that story. So one guy came up to me at the break and he pulls me over to the side and he says, "Hey, are you spiritual?" And I remember I looked around a little bit and I said, "Yeah, are you? Are you too?" And now we can talk. Now we can talk about spirituality and not be. It's largely because of mindfulness, and there's great research on how the brain changes when you meditate, and
Hmm.
the science of spirituality. So I think science and spirituality are coming together to create the possibility for human beings to rise to a different type of society. And I think we're here to help that in little ways. And Karen, I think it's all vibrations. I think maybe when you stopped working and meditated and walked in nature, you might have been sending out positive, joyous vibrations that did more to change the world than 20 years of consulting projects. It's all vibrations. That's what the physicists tell us anyway. So that that's what this age is about, Jeannie. And certainly
Uh-huh.
aging people
Mhm.
have the opportunity to put out their best vibrations of their life because they've never known more. You sure your body is not doing what it used to be able to do, but that doesn't mean your human spirit is anything
Mhm.
diminished. It's still expanding. So that's my take on it. That's our real work.
So, John, I have a question for you then, because we've often read about how I think especially men have been laid off. There's a lot of like the people who used to take manufacturing jobs and they're no longer available in this country. And so we have a lot of what would typically be blue collar, and I'm going to say men who are underemployed or unemployed, and they suffer from depression and anxiety, and the suicide rates are high, and this is why we get some of the movements that we've had. And there's been discussions about, well, people need this meaningful employment. They need to feel useful and adding value to society, and this goes for men and women, but I think it's been more blue collar than pink collar. So if we get a society now where it's not just blue collar, it's white collar, pink collar, every collar, no longer has enough value adding work to do, how do they, if you can't get meaning from your work, I guess, is the answer meaning from spirituality? I
Hmm.
mean, what's the alternative? What would you recommend somebody do who's maybe 30 years old and they've been laid off and now they have a universal basic income to just keep them
Hmm.
subsistence? How should they fill their time to find meaning?
One thing I would say to that, Karen, is there's lots of suffering in the world, and human beings seem to be built for service, servicing others. And I think you could take a boring corporate job and leave that and find a meaningful service job,
Mhm.
whatever that might look like, helping kids, helping elders, and as long as service is in the equation, seem to find meaning.
Hmm.
When people find work soul sucking, it's because they don't see the impact and where it's going anywhere. Pencil pusher versus I help these customers, I help that. But like the HEB, the big grocery store, they let all those 120 some thousand people know that this is a loving, working community, and we're serving customers and we're giving them the best quality for the least cost. And they give people reasons for being there. And so as long as you have some kind of service in mind, and that's what leaders' jobs are, I think, is to frame the work in such a way that it has meaning.
Mhm.
And so I'm not sure I answered your question, but I at least tried to address it through one word, which is service. Service and consciousness
Mhm.
expanding and finding out who you really are will really help on this process, as opposed to I'm a consumer, I go to work, but there's nothing ever wrong. You should always be proud if you worked and you brought food home to your family, and If you
Mhm.
sustain yourself, there's something noble in that part too.
I have some perspective on this is I moved into Prineville, which is only about 1,200 people, but a bigger county. I got interested in volunteering. So I ended up taking on too many volunteer jobs. And some of them I like better than others. I like working with the children because I never had children and I'm very interested on supervised play. So that one's very, very fulfilling. But one thing across all these volunteer organizations I'm with, and then others that I know, all of the leaders and all of almost 95% of the people in them are women. So I
Mm.
think we need, whether you call it rebranding or something, we need to make these roles in these organizations important to men. The only exception was in Portland, we had Habitat for Humanity and it was building. So we had a lot of people building, but it wasn't relationship and service to kids at risk or to addicts or whatever. So I think there's some, I'll just speak to my own organization or my own thing. I think we need some creativity in bringing men into it. For example, this is a big fishing community. Lots of lakes. You know, there are kids who've never fished in their life. Take your boat out, bring kids, get them on the boat, have them have an opportunity to learn how to fish and other things like that. Because men have interests and capabilities sometimes that are different than women. And yet the kids and the people in need really need access to males and to male talents. But my friend who's working with young people who can't find their entry level white collar jobs, she's moving them to look at public service, to do things with nonprofits. So maybe that will put some people in a generation of it will think differently about for the future. But the need is huge and find a way for it to be an attractive and meaningful step for men, I think would help a lot.
So
Like
moving to a caring economy.
Right. Yeah. And, making that cool for guys, a caring community. Hey, that's really
Yeah.
cool. It's like, no, no, women care. I don't care.
So interesting. Okay. So, I just like to close up the conversation. Do you have any last thoughts, final thoughts on the topic?
I'll go with Gibran again. I'll come back to that wonderful poem. We work to keep pace with the earth and with the soul of the earth. And work is empty and left unless there is love. And it don't work with bitterness because you bake a bitter loaf, which feeds but half man's hunger. So Joseph Campbell used to say, "Follow your bliss," and I do think there is something about the transformative power of human consciousness that can shape jobs, that can sculpt jobs, and that can be transformed by the people doing them. That's my hope. Thanks for the great opportunity, Karen. Jeannie.
Okay, if any part of this is true, and the guy who founded Sun Microsystems said no 5-year-old today will ever have to work, which I believe is um, an interesting projection. But between now and a future that he's talking about, I think people have a great deal of choice and a great opportunity to design their life in ways that John talks about, increase your consciousness, increase your connection with earth, increase your connection with other people. There's many, many ways for you to design as an individual. And then for those who are in charge of companies and policymakers, they have a role to play as well too. It is difficult and it's going to take imagination and it's going to take continuity and problem solving on a cultural level and on a national level, just speaking of the United States. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work to be done. So again, the optimist in me says, "Oh, great! What a wonderful opportunity!" And the pessimist says, "We really need to get on with it." And for any of us, we need to try to help solve this situation.
Thank you. I mean, my own thoughts on this is, John, I love what you said about, the service, and Jeannie, you seem to echo that. Is think we really need to examine our our economics. We're very consumer driven, and you
Mhm.
mentioned Jeannie with Ford having the foresight to make the cars affordable for employees, And John, you talked about distraction, and all of that goes with the consumerism. And I think we're so driven by consumerism. And the earth is saying that that's not sustainable. And
And
yeah, and I had really hoped during the pandemic that we could take a step back and say, is consumerism as a way of life really feeding and nourishing our souls? And I think the obvious answer is no, no, it's not. So I just hope the whole need to work is really around the need to be of service to others. So maybe that's a better a better way. A better way to reframe that. We don't need to work, but we need to be of service to others.
uh,
So thank you. Thank you for that insight, and I really enjoyed having you on.
Thanks, Karen.
All right.
thank you.
Bye
All
all.
right. Thank you.